Okay. Second time is a charm, I hope. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Good. Okay. Anthony, I was a little bit worried. You were the last nod. Okay, perfect. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us while we worked through that. So again, I'm Renee DeVerstal. I am the Chief Medical Officer of Vave, and I also am an academic hospitalist at Oregon Health and Science University. So excited to have these three fantastic clinicians, researchers, professors with us on this Educast about mission-driven work, and it's true to my heart because this is why I do what I do and why my husband gets annoyed with me for working all the time. So I really look forward to introducing you all, and then I'm going to have you speak a little bit, and then we'll just go into questions. And I really hope that people out on social media streams will send us their questions. So we're going to go in the order that I met you all out in the POCUS world. So Dr. Anjali Bagra is up first. She's a professor of medicine and the medical director of the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity at Mayo. She's also the chair of several of the groups within Mayo national boards and is a nationally and internationally known thought leader, educator, and speaker on the topics of resilience, leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the reason we met out at WCUME, or World Congress for Ultrasound and Medical Education. We've taught together for American College of Physicians and other courses. And over the years getting to know her, I learned about her passion for resilience. And then she co-founded and co-directs this well-known Mayo Grit conference, which I'm dying to make it to. It stands for Growth, Resilience, Inspiration, and Tenacity. And the course is intended to empower men and women with the skills and resources to promote equity and build an inclusive leadership in healthcare. So I really wanted to hear from you, Anjali. I hope it's okay I call you Anjali, Dr. Bagra. I wanted to hear your passion here, besides the ways that I know you most in the POCUS world.
Sure. So first off, thank you. We'll go with Renee, Dr. DeVerstal, if that's okay.
Of course.
This is just a dream come true. I think it was almost like 10 years ago that we met at the WCUME conference in Portland, Oregon. And we were a bunch of women within POCUS in internal medicine. At the time, I did not know of Dr. Lewis, and I'm so glad to be within the circle now. But going back to passion, I am born and brought up in India. And growing up, I did not have this concept of gender equity or inequity. The head of our country was a woman. The head of our police force nationally was a woman. So I guess I just grew up thinking that, it's all equal. It's a world of all equals. I ended up going to an all-women's medical school in New Delhi, India. And we were majority. I didn't really face much of inequity and there. I did train as a radiologist in India, hence my love for POCUS. Did 100 ultrasounds a day on an average as part of training. And so ultrasound, my first love, that's where the genesis of ultrasound came. And then my husband and I, we relocated to the United States 17 years ago. The love of POCUS continued within internal medicine as I trained as an internist in the US. And I also got exposed to a lot of inequity and issues around inclusion and just being a mom of a 6-month-old in training and learning a whole new medical system within the US. Over the years, I have to admit, with mentors, role models, both at Mayo and outside of Mayo, within the POCUS world, both of these passions morphed into let's do something about it, which came in the form of leadership opportunities, and it's onward from there.
I love it so much. I didn't know all the way back. We've sat down a lot to chat over these courses and things, but the full genesis of your story is incredible. And I look forward to asking you more questions. So next we're on to Dr. Arisa Lewis, who I've seen at several different WCUME, again, World Congress for Ultrasound and Medical Education. Those conferences are put on by SUSME, or Society of Ultrasound and Medical Education. And then I think it was 2019 when Dr. Lewis was the president of SCUF, Society for Clinical Ultrasound Fellowships, that I was at a course and saw her really leading it as the president of this. And so Dr. Lewis is a professor of emergency medicine and radiology at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital. She's the director of point of care ultrasound division there as well. And she's led POCUS courses regionally, nationally, internationally. She also publishes and speaks on POCUS, in addition to equity, health design, leadership, mentorship, medical education, global health, simulation, and national policy. It's a lot of things, and I've been seeing her in HBR recently, which is phenomenal. She's the creator and host of a podcast on healthcare equity and current trends called The Visible Voices. And I will say this has captivated me over the past year. It makes my commute better. It's one of my favorite podcasts. And the thing that I love about it so much is that it's very clear to me, and I believe other users, this isn't just a podcast. It's not just a line on a CV, that this is really core important work to you. And I just would love to hear the genesis of how you came up with this idea and the work you've been doing that's so fantastic.
Thanks for such a really kind introduction, Renee. And I'm really honored to be on this panel with Anjali and with Anthony. And I guess I'll say that every year I try to gain a new skill. I work on something new. And within emergency medicine, my subspecialty has been point-of-care ultrasound, education, research, administration, leading divisions, having different local, national, international leadership roles. And dovetailing off a bit of what Anjali shared, like I started experiencing directly or indirectly, lack of equity. And equity, diversity, inclusion, this didn't just start for me in 2020 because of the year that we've just navigated. This has been since a child, certainly in terms of my focus to academics in college, university, med school, residency. I have lots and lots of stories. So as I started investigating how to be on a podcast, how to run a podcast, all the different logistics, building a podcast, part of the impetus was that in terms of who were the subject matter experts, who were the ones using their voice to talk about medical education facts, to tell a story, to give the cutting edge updates regarding COVID and COVID vaccinations. If you stop and look at the voices selected, the voices chosen, the voices to whom people look and who people become used to listening to, it's often not diverse. It's often white men. And I think that to really realize all that medicine offers, diverse teams are successful teams. That's quoted from a Harvard Business Review article. I truly believe that, which means you have to have everybody speaking, everybody representing. So there were a few reasons that I decided to launch the podcast myself, as opposed to, I started by being invited to speak on a podcast. Then I started doing podcast episodes under the umbrella of another organization. And what really pushed me to go out on my own was last year. Last year was such a landmark, banner, unique, horrible year that I thought it's time. It's time to get it out there, to use my voice, to get the voices that I want amplified out there, because these are people who have stories to tell, who are leading, but may not be tapped, picked, and seen as leaders purely because of some of the demographics. And, I chose healthcare equity and current trends as, I'm very interested in equity in healthcare and in medicine. Equity is, many, many ways equity is important to me. And then the current trends is so that I can talk about fun topics that are of interest to me, whether it's talking about espresso, talking about books, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's just fun. I will say one of the things that was reflected back to me that I hadn't previously appreciated was that these episodes were more about me than perhaps I appreciated in terms of telling stories. So I often select guests that are on a topic about which I've had experiences or I've had stories. And it's been interesting to see how there's been a storytelling aspect to these episodes that may not be me directly, because I might not be telling my stories, but through my guests, I'm indirectly telling stories. Thanks for allowing me to share that.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for sharing that. I love the work, and it's great to, and one of my favorites, I'll give a shout out to my other podcasting friend, or there's a lot of fantastic physicians podcasting, but it was fantastic to hear you and Dr. Adara Landry on Dr. Mark Shapiro's Explore the Space podcast. And that was like when all of my worlds came together. So, okay, fantastic. So now we are on to Dr. Anthony Weeks, and he maybe could have gotten put before Risa, but I feel like Risa, we met earlier in Wakumi, but so I first saw Dr. Weeks give a talk about the RV at AIUM, American Institute of Ultrasound in Medicine. And my mind was blown. I was like, this dude knows more about the RV than anyone I've ever known. And he also could break it down in a way that myself, I was pretty, I mean, I'd been in ultrasound for a couple of years by then, but I wasn't feeling as confident as others. And so he broke it down in such an understandable way that I went up to him afterwards and had said, you know, gosh, that was like the best RV talk I've ever heard. And so then as I was trying to think about, okay, who do I want to bring in, you know, for this mission driven work? And I saw a video for, and I'll talk more about Anthony's background. Actually, I should go ahead and do this now. So Dr. Anthony Weeks is a professor of emergency medicine and the director of emergency medicine at Carolinas Medical Center. And there he was actually the emergency ultrasound fellowship director for 11 years. And the clinical research that led to this phenomenal talk and others focuses on echocardiography and pulmonary embolism. And so in this work, he's been a regional director for multi-center studies. He has organized grassroots pulmonary embolism outcomes study, PESCOR, so research network of 6 EDs. And that actually went on to get federal funding. And he also is the principal investigator of the CODE Pulmonary Embolism Research Registry. And this is for the more severe forms of pulmonary embolism that come into the regional departments, EDs there of Atrium Healthcare, which is part of the Carolinas system. And so I happened to see a video from the Master of Science degree for clinical research for healthcare professionals at Drexel University School of Medicine. And that is quite the mouthful. And in it, he was talking about his passion and what led him to do the phenomenal research that he does. And I just thought he is the perfect person to bring for our panel. So I would love for you to share with the audience the motivation behind your phenomenal research.
All right. Thanks for that introduction. I'm not sure if I could accept all of those compliments, but I'll take it today. I've been involved with emergency ultrasound education for quite some time. Did many lectures. Like breaking things down, making it simplified, but not oversimplifying it, and just trying to inspire people to appreciate this fantastic tool that could make them better clinicians. The challenge after a while was I wanted to spend more time instead of wearing too many hats and, you know, taking care of the ultrasound probe and taking care of different things. I wanted to focus on something that required a little more attention than just when you're just juggling many balls. So I wanted to not just give the talks, but actually spend a long time so I could be the person who adds to that one bullet point. And that really is almost like being a glutton for punishment because it takes a lot of time and effort to do that. But after having some jobs where I realized, shoot, that's what it feels like to wake up and hate going into work, where I had a job where I was more of dealing with more administrative work. I'm like, oh, that's what people feel like. To have a research idea or something that's been vexing to you because you deal with it over and over and you keep saying these darn PE patients, they could really fool you.
Yeah.
And you start looking into ways to simplify it or at least triage them or get better information. That appealed to me. And that coupled with other personal experiences where one of my friends died suddenly and a family member, a cousin, he also had a bad PE with syncope. It sort of drove you to do a little bit more. And I'm not curing scurvy, but the thing is, I'm still spending more time delving into the problem. Some of the research that's been done, the outcomes seem to focus on things that are far out and don't inform us as clinicians right away. And I saw opportunities to go into that. I got involved with research because I realized it is very challenging. And I've had some experiences where I've spent close to 500 hours just trying to enroll 21 patients. And I'm like, I got to do better than this. I've got to be more efficient. And I'm not the guy now that you really have a conversation with at the water cooler, because now we're having conversations about what variables, whether it's categorical or continuous. And really, you'll want to poke your eye out if you start talking to me.
Okay.
But it's been really gratifying. And when we have troubles or things are going through droughts, it's really helpful to know that how the bigger purpose is out there, and it provides you with that grit that we talk about, because you're engaged, you know it's worth it. And the results that we're seeing now that we didn't publish yet are really encouraging. And I think they will have an impact. And that's probably something that makes you feel really proud, because, you know, it was worth all of the effort. And hopefully I'm able to write it up in ways that will be appreciated by others. And the other challenge is you never feel satisfied, because you take the blows, you go down, you get up, you find ways to improve. And then you're like, I can't wait to finish this so I could rest. And then some other idea comes in, and you're like, gosh, I've got to look into this. And now we're working on another registry. So it's actually pretty gratifying. Painful, I can't lie, but it's really gratifying.
I love it. I will say, as a hospitalist, and I know Anjali also takes care of patients in the hospital, we also never know how things will go when patients come out of the ICU and they've had a huge PE, lysis, et cetera. And I've had good outcomes, and I've had really traumatic outcomes for myself and my team and the patient and the family upon discharge. And so I look forward to this work as well. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing all of that. And I look forward to seeing another RV talk from you sometime. So the first question, first of all, we put this in all of our social media tweets, but anybody watching this, please feel free to either post whatever media you're watching it on, or you can email it into the team, or like tweet me right now, or whatever. Just send it in via whatever you're watching, and we would love to ask your questions. So the first question actually goes to Risa, and the question was, when and why? And you kind of answered that but you can, we'll touch on that again. And then also at the same time, who is the most memorable guest you've ever interviewed?
Thank you for the question. So I'm at my 1-year anniversary. It was March of 2020 that I launched the podcast. And as I said, it was really to amplify voices. I think my tagline is, welcome to the Visible Voices podcast, amplifying voices that may be known, those unknown, and all those covering healthcare equity and current trends. So you'll notice in terms of my episodes, there's often more than one guest, and someone may be well-known and some may be less well-known, with the goal of getting these people out there in terms of their voice. I can't say that I've had one most memorable. There have been certain guests that have been memorable for certain reasons. So, for example, Gloria Steinem was memorable because of who she is, and I never expected to be sitting with her in her living room having that conversation. And more, she said two things that really stuck with me. When I asked her what her health and fitness regimen was to have maintained such health at her age, she looked at me like that was just a bananas question, because she claimed to never have watched what she ate and doesn't exercise. But she looked at me, she said, I have friends. So in other words, having friends and loved ones and keeping those social beings close to you is what keeps you healthy. The other thing was, she really, without even my intending to, spoke about voice and the importance of using one's voice. And towards the end of that episode, I asked her, what would you say to the audience members that are worried about using their voice, or concerned about speaking out, or concerned about negative consequences and repercussions? Because within medicine, we see this happen. And she just, again, looked at me like just surprised, like, why wouldn't you use your voice? And it was just really important to hear her say that, because this is a woman who had used her voice literally for decades to really, change the landscape of equity.
Hey, Risa, may I expand on that? You may not know this, but New York City, when you asked her if she would be willing to join you on your podcast, I was in the room at the time. It was just uncanny. I had like, it's funny, as you were narrating, I was nostalgic and I was thinking of that line that everybody was in trying to ask her a question. And so thank you for following through on that and bringing her on the podcast. And she's definitely a voice worth sharing as many times as we can.
Thank you.
I love that backstory. That was one. I love that one. And then from a personal perspective, I really loved, and of course from the, oh goodness, actually I'll look this up while someone else is talking. And there was one, and I want to get the name correct. There was a particularly very powerful, meaningful one to me. So the next question, actually, so Anjali, you've done we just went through a little bit of the things that you in terms of your work and your research, and you told us about being a radiologist and coming to us and discovering this inequity. And the question is, so if you had to pick one thing, what are you most proud of? What do you feel is your most crowning achievement, besides, of course, being the mother of two phenomenal kids, wonderful kids?
Yeah, I struggle with that question. First off, this whole concept of pride, it's a really hard one for me. Culturally, I grew up always looking at what we are aiming for. But what I've learned by a lot of role models and mentors is you cannot just keep postponing your joy. At some point, you've got to pause, you've got to look back, and you've got to celebrate where you've come from. And I think that is extremely important for all of us who are in the space of equity, inclusion. And, this is hard work. This is work which challenges us every day. So honestly, my pride meter, Renee, shifts every day. The days that I'm able to have a crucial conversation with my teenager are moments of like pride. I did this without a microaggression. I did this without letting a bias come in. My pride scale keeps moving. But if it's going to be like one unifying theme of what makes me proud is, just the resilience and the tenacity with which both my husband and I, as we moved here, we stuck in with confidence. And when I look back, my pride is in giving back. It's not about like my personal journey of moving forward as the world looks at and as we define our growth, but it's about giving back and sharing it with others and really, truly empowering others. And I can, think of at my workplace within Mayo with Grit, for example. That's a very satisfying thing for me personally. It's a place where you democratize access to sponsorship, coaching, mentorship. It's not about somebody else coming and tapping you into a leadership position, but you create that opportunity. So being able to create opportunities for many is what truly gives me a sense of fulfillment. Could I call it pride? Maybe, but truly it's fulfillment, where you share that, if you crack a recipe for a perfect dish and you're able to share it and replicate it and others enjoy it, for me, that's fulfillment. And this has not been a linear path by any means. It's been convoluted, there's been backtracking. But one thing that really I've picked up, I actually trained in mindfulness through my professional journey. I went through a MBSR certification, mindfulness-based stress reduction and biofeedback. So in my other clinical hat, I see patients for stress management and resilience at Mayo. And what really, truly gives me pride and fulfillment in that role is holding people when they are the most vulnerable. And that's not something you measure by a leadership position, but it's that human touch. And really, it's really allowed me to have pride in being vulnerable myself.
Absolutely. That's incredibly, incredibly meaningful. One of my favorite things that I've a reference in terms of career trajectory, growth, et cetera, is that it never should have been the corporate ladder. Like there's one rung and you have to go up in order. It's the corporate jungle gym or the career jungle gym. And sometimes you make a lateral move because it opens up a whole different, or I guess you could call it rock climbing even. And so that's been kind of my adventure of the past 8 months. So question came in for Anthony, and I'm going to tag team onto this one. So one was, why did you decide to specialize in emergency medicine? And the other part is, so you mentioned there were a couple of positions you hadn't liked. I think sometimes when we get more experience, we feel more comfortable with ourselves to say, this isn't the right fit for me. I'm going to move on. I'm just curious, looking back, if there's one thing you could tell your younger self. So again, emergency medicine, and also if there's one thing you could tell your younger self, what would that be? So it's a tough one.
I would say just be truer to myself than I have been. I've I've done things because others have recommended that I do it, or they think that how I can do it. And I had enough information inside of myself to know that this isn't for me. But my wrestling was because I couldn't tell the difference between needing to take a risk and being reluctant to take a risk versus viewing this as an opportunity. But a lot of the times your gut feeling is true. And I took on, let's say, an administrative job that really was not for me. I sometimes felt like I wanted to poke my eyes out, but I was a late bloomer with research. It's only after I got my AARP card that I got into research. But I'm more of a behind the scenes kind of person. So I needed to trust my instincts and not do things for external validation or to satisfy someone else's wishes or leadership plan for me or path for me. I needed to realize what was really something that I enjoyed or really drove me to wake up in the morning and deal with the blows and deal with the disappointments, but know that it was worth it. I eventually found that out and started to have more career agency later on. So then you became a little more comfortable saying, this is not really for me. Not that you're a procrastinator or you're trying to avoid work, but it's like, no, I have something that I want to focus on and I want to give it my full attention so I can do it well. And other things may not be where I'm focusing on. So that's what happened with me. I would look back and say, you sort of had enough information to know what you should have chosen and what you should have not. So sometimes you have to take the risk to trust your instincts.
Absolutely. One of my favorite mentors had commented very early on, Renee, you have to find some things you need, some things are for external validation, the lines on the CV to try to get promoted. Congrats to all three of you for being full professors. But other things are going to move you for the internal validation and what that brings to you. So yeah, I love it. Anyone else have any reflections on that while I look at the other questions?
I'll just echo what Anthony said. And, for me, it's something you have to almost learn and unlearn because otherwise that comparison trap sometimes academically or professionally can be very devastating without full realization. Because, how like academic medicine can just appear as these are the things you need to do to get to this position, whether that's full professor, whatever that is. But if it's not coming with an internal fulfillment, or in other words, if your short and long-term goals don't align, or if they're divergent, that leads to a lot of dissatisfaction, resentment, and unhappiness. That's a path to be totally avoided. And it's not easy to avoid it. In fact, it's quite easy to get trapped into something that looks like a recipe for success, but maybe a complete recipe for disaster. So thank you, Anthony, for sharing that. And it's hard. And, we all have to continuously work on it, I feel.
It's almost the academic hamster wheel. And so it's important to know to carve out your areas and the things that make you happy. Risa, you look like you were right about to chime in.
I was just going to say that, I think what I resonate with in terms of what Anthony and Anjali and you have shared is trust your gut. Trust your gut. And what your gut tells you is specific to you, and it's different than someone else's gut. So you have to trust your gut. I do think if you are someone that's committed to personal growth, that becomes much easier with age and stage within academics. And the push me, pull you that we all feel is being brainwashed academic, because what we're told, what we're brainwashed, what becomes defined as success may not be our exact definitions of success. So you have to trust your gut.
Could not agree anymore. There's a question for Anjali, and it's kind of for everybody. So for Anjali, specific to your role at Mayo, what's one thing you think organizations can do to positively impact diversity and inclusion? And then for everyone, it kind of came up for how can you promote diversity and inclusion within smaller organizations, even startups like ours. We're constantly working on this. So we can start with Anjali and then go down the line, whoever wants to speak.
Yeah, no, I think that's such an excellent question. It's fundamental to the change that we all want to see in the space. And in my brief experience so far in the role anyway, but I've had the fortune of watching an excellent role model who preceded me in the role. I think, most importantly for large organizations, I'm going to speak out of my experience at Mayo Clinic. D&I work, all equity, inclusion, diversity work needs to be very strategically, deliberately, and explicitly knit into the overall strategy of the organization. It can't be an offshoot or an appendage sitting in a corner. It needs to be a priority. It needs to be a focus of all kinds of financial plans. It needs to be a priority for all kinds of leadership development plans. It needs to be a priority of the workplace, of your marketplace and your community. So it really has to be a very, very deliberate commitment from top down and bottoms up. Where things can fall apart is, and what I'm seeing a lot is, there is often a frozen middle in large organizations. Mm-hmm. Top leaders are, they're moving in that zone. They are trying to walk the talk. They are picking up on emerging best practices, standards, and stuff. And it's really hard to move your whole organization along. So as these strategies are built into deliberate deliverables for organizations, accountabilities, there needs to be strong operational plans. Because otherwise there's a disconnect between effort and goal. And that doesn't lead us anywhere. And certainly, this work can't be done without having full awareness of that the work needs to be done for the people, with the people, not just, them as end users. This needs to be done with the people who are most impacted by these issues. So empowering them is extremely important in the work. I mean, these are just high overview of, I would say high level themes. For organizations. There's so much into this that we can dig into this at granular level, but I would say that would be a starting point for organizational approach.
Yeah, the frozen middle, I hadn't heard that, and that is, it cemented a whole lot for me. Risa, you were going to go.
I was going to say that I think it has to be deliberate and it has to be intentional. There's plenty of literature to talk about how essentially nothing has changed over time. Over the last 25 years, we really haven't seen positive movement in terms of salary equity, leadership position equity, and actually, reportings of harassment, whether it's sexual, whether it's gender, whether it's racial, ethnic. And I've had plenty of mentors and friends and colleagues who are older than me say, Risa, nothing has changed over time. And that's remarkable, to speak with people who are retired or are in the final phase of their career in their 70s, say nothing has changed. And one piece of currency that I learned early on, it was kind of a hard lesson and an important lesson. And Anthony is a part of this lesson. So Anthony and I met in 2002. And I've said this, he is one of my sole he for she allies, male allies I've had throughout my professional career. And yes, Anthony is special. And also that I have had so few speaks to the environment of medicine. And, you know, I'm not going to go into depth about what it means to be a he for she or what it means to be an ally, but suffice it to say that none of us get to where we are alone. And early on, my first POCUS publications were with Anthony. And I started learning the importance of the currency of putting things in writing and getting things published. And I can tell a story, share a story, talk about something with diversity, equity, inclusion, that people are like, oh, that sounds horrible, or I can't believe that happened, or wow, really? And that, from what I've seen and experienced, does not quite have the impact to getting something published. And because when people see something in writing, they're like, you told me this, but I had no idea. And it's not about shock value, and it's not about an emotional expression of a story. It's actually about data and facts. And there's a lot of data and a lot of facts. And I will say that within the POCUS community, we are working on publishing how we've done in terms of gender inclusion, how we've done in terms of racial ethnic inclusion. And it's not negative, and it's not to point fingers. It's to say, look, this is where we've been so far. Mm-hmm. Look at how much we can do, because there's a lot we can do. And there was a question in the box, I'll just keep it this last part brief, that there's a lot we can do. There's a lot we can do in terms of who we invite to speak, of with whom we write, of who we nominate for positions, who we nominate for awards. And it's got to be intentional. It's got to be kind of on your mind at all times. Mm-hmm. One final share is there were years at every single SCUF conference, and they would talk about the first ever ultrasound fellow was, and they would always say that it was this white man in the point of care ultrasound world. And he is a friend, he is a mentor, and yes, he's held many leadership positions and he's published. But you know what? He was not the first fellow, because he told me himself, he's like, no, Risa, I wasn't the first fellow. And I kept correcting, because it was 3 women. The first 3 POCUS fellows were women, but I couldn't get anybody to change their narrative or change their history. Now it is written down. Now it is on the website, accurately stated. Now it will be coming out in a manuscript. But it's just remarkable, the resistance and the sort of revisionist history that occurs, and we are not immune.
Thank you so much.
If I could chime in, I would completely agree with what they said. One thing that I noticed, like when I'm driving to and from work, is that you look at these side view mirrors of these modern cars, and you start seeing these little lights that turn yellow or turn red. And before, everyone just considered it the blind spot. But when you put a name on it, and you're deliberately trying to say, you know what? Yes, I'm seeing everything around me except for the blind spot. You put a name on it. You recognize, once we start talking about the named blind spot, that a lot of things that are potentially or actually really impactful to others and to yourself could happen in the blind spot. So the fact is that now a lot of technology is focusing on that named blind spot that we have, and that's made things better for everyone. So I totally agree with putting a name on it, so you'll be very deliberate in getting rid of the blind spots. That'll be better for everyone.
I love that analogy. It's fantastic. So how about, normally I kind of cut us right off at 3:45. I would love to just maybe have one last question for y'all, because it's such a rich discussion. So a question came in about, how has your mission changed over time? And so if everyone wants to chime in, the other one, see, another one just came in. So I'm gonna shout out the last couple questions, and then let's just have y'all speak to whatever speaks to you. So trusting your gut. Can you give so you all gave a couple good examples, any bad examples? And then in terms of equity in healthcare, what do you think we need to focus on in this moment? So that was a smattering. Anyone can reflect on whatever they want.
I'm happy to go first, Renee. First off, I want to quickly piggyback on Risa's comment around, not much has changed. I think within equity, inclusion, and diversity, one characteristic is that we are so stuck with admiring the problem. If you look at where our energy is focused, it's in studying over and over again, what the problem is. And sometimes, there is this analysis paralysis because you're like, wait, oh my God, there's, where shall I start? Anthony, this goes back to, what happens when you're thinking of a research project. It's like hamsters in your head. The default mode of the brain just doesn't quit. This is where I love to bring the neuroscience and the mindfulness and the equity work. It kind of has a perfect thing. So one of the mantras that I personally use now is, to what extent are we going to invest cognitively into understanding and admiring the problem? And then how are we going to utilize that data that we generate into analysis and action? So it's awareness, analysis, and action. But we are kind of caught between awareness and analysis. I don't know, but I'm hopeful. I think this past year really pulled the sheets on a lot of inequities and the magnitude of the inequities. So I'm really going into, this equity and healthcare and what the focus is. From our patient population, we know that this has got to focus on improving the experiences of our people from a healthcare standpoint, which is where we all are committed. And focus, in my mind, is such a great tool to do that at the bedside, out in the field, anywhere. That's how I started my journey. I was a trained radiologist doing internal medicine. People would just look at me, this woman's crazy. She just grabs an ultrasound machine. But that power of what you can do to educate your patient at the bedside. What I remember from 18 years ago, Anthony, is my patient with PE that we diagnosed with like a D-shaped septum in the ICU. I'm an intern having this conversation with my fellow. We rushed this patient to the CT anyway on a heparin drip. So awareness, analysis, and action. That's kind of like my mantra with that. Has your mission changed over time? Oh boy, when we relocated, my husband and I, to the United States, I had no idea, or even I remotely dream of doing what I'm doing today. So yes, mission evolved over time based on what my lived realities were, what opportunities were for improving the environment around me. I do think this is, again, something you do as a team. I don't know if I'm going to have this unique opportunity of calling out two of my rock solid allies, sponsors, push and pull mentors, both you and Risa, Renee. So thank you. This work can't be done alone. And once you have like your team, people who believe in you, you're not always going to be right. It's not about being right or perfect, but it's about having the right attitude and the intent. And you're going to be wrong, but if you surround yourself with people who can give you grace, and if you give yourself grace, that path of, your mission evolving just becomes easier, more fun, and more meaningful.
Absolutely. How about you two?
I'll talk about mission and whether or not my mission has changed over time. I'd like to say that my mission has been constant, and my ability to support that mission, the resources to support that mission have changed over time. I believe I've always been motivated to create a better environment for patients, a better environment for trainees, and a better environment for colleagues that are coming after me. And that overlaps with point of care ultrasound, and that overlaps with diversity, equity, inclusion, creating safe, dignified, equitable work environments for everybody on all sides of the equation, meaning patients, 100% absolutely, trainees, yes, and colleagues. And I talked about aging and stage, and when you are mid-career, you see the people in stages before you, and you want to hope and see and assist with making sure they don't have as difficult of a path to navigate as perhaps you yourself have had or you've seen others had. Because at the end of the day, we go into medicine to take good care of patients, and the fewer their distractions are to do that, the better for everybody.
Couldn't agree more. Anthony, I think we're going to let you have the last few words, and then I'll just send the audience off at the end with a teaser for our next Educast, which is actually going to be focused in primary care. And we're going to have 3 outpatient clinicians talking about how, ultrasound isn't just for the ER, the ICU, the hospital, primary care. And my goal in life is to work part-time doing home visits for urgent care, elderly, debilitated patients. But so that's the hook for next month. And then Anthony, I would love if you could send us home with your, whether it's again, equity focus, mission changing, anything. We'd love if you could take us home.
Well, the part that I enjoy is that the mission evolves. The part that I enjoy would be just the team building that has occurred, where I'm working with people that I could see already they are brighter than I am. And you see them get to a certain level of excellence that's even beyond what you saw as being in their future. To me, that's probably one of the most satisfying parts of the projects that we've done. And I can't really say there's a special project because each one builds upon the other one. And just realizing that, Angela, Greg, Dan, all these people that I worked with, the people that got committed to going on and taking on these consent forms and scanning at 24/7. All those folks were invaluable. Jaron Raper and Carly and Katie and all Alyssa, friendships that'll last for a long time because they really believed in it. I don't want to say they drank the Kool-Aid or whatever, but they went with it. I needed them. It wasn't me just helping them. I needed them. Mm-hmm. They've become friends, and that journey has just been fantastic. The most satisfying part of it all.
I love it. That's a perfect message. I feel so thankful to have had you 3 on. I got goosebumps several times. I mean, just a really impactful discussion for me, and I'm sure for everybody else watching. And I just really thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to seeing you all out in POCUS conferences or GRIT or on the podcast or anything else. And I'm gonna skip us on to, I'm gonna put up the date, and I will say hello to you 3 in the green room and end the broadcast for everyone else. So it's been wonderful. Thank you for joining us.